All right, so you can think about the drawing skill as being divided up or explainable or discussable in terms of 10 different skills. And I've given you this handout which has them kind of listed on the back with a little bit of discussion. So we have, and these words are very commonly used words, but in drawing they have very specific meanings that we will explore. And you can do drawings that are based on any one of these things, but you can also take 2 or 3 of these things and kind of sandwich them together like filters on a camera to get very interesting effects. We'll see that down the road. So they are gesture, contour, mass, space, silhouette, figure ground, tonality, modeling, geometrics, and composition. And under each of these there are little skills and ways of thinking and ways of drawing that we're going to have a look at. A very important one is the geometrics part of it here, which includes perspective and axonometrics and little special ways of drawing 3D stuff. And I'll be spending a good bit of time with you on that as well. I actually do a perspective course here that's just straight perspective, but we're going to get into it enough that we'll be able to understand how to construct various kinds of buildings and forms and so forth. And yeah, so let's kind of look at this. Now there's little examples of some of these things here on this side, but they don't really mean too much to you by just looking along. So I'm going to just demonstrate a few little things here. I've never done this with Copic markers before. These are great. I don't know if you've ever used these things. They're we'll be drawing mostly with charcoal, and that's fine. But these are refillable markers, and the nice thing about them, if you haven't used them before, is they have a really big tip on them. See, like that size. So it's kind of like working with a paintbrush, and you refill them. So you buy a bottle of ink, and let's say you buy the empty thing, and it's probably, I don't know, $8 for the empty thing, and you spend another $8 for a bottle of ink, and the bottle of ink can refill this about half a dozen times at least, you know. So you can get colors and you can get grays. The most useful thing to have is a set of neutral grays. That's what I've got here, and the neutral grays come in numbers from 1 to 9. 10 would be black, and you don't need them all. I just, as a matter of interest, I've got a number 2, a number 4, a number 6, and those are the ones that I pretty much use all the time, you know, for drawing. You can get them in the broad tip, and that part of the broad tip has a narrow tip on it, and you can also get them in a more of an ordinary felt pen, which has a regular felt pen tip and has a brush pen on the other end, you know, and they're really cool things. I mean, they've been around for a long time. I've known of them, but I never really got into them because I was always just using regular felt pens, you know, that you buy kind of off the rack. And I got into them about a couple of months ago, 3-4 months ago, and I love these things. You know, they're very cool things. So anyway, let's get on with it here. So the first thing, I'm just going to run through these with you so that we have a kind of a general understanding. We're going to be doing lots of drawing in these modes along the way. But the first one here is gesture. So by gesture, what we're talking about is kind of like the gestures that you'd make with your hands. You know, just ordinary hand gestures in describing things. So you might say to somebody that you had a vase and you'd like them to lay out the flowers in this vase in a certain way. So you might with your hands just kind of throw a gesture like this and say, well, we had this vase and it's got some flowers and it's got some, you know, some leaves coming out of it, and the vase is kind of like that and it's sitting on top of a table, you know. Well, that's a gesture drawing. I didn't try to draw flowers. I didn't try to draw a vase particularly, but I moved my arm in a like mime, in a miming kind of a way, and you can actually get better at doing that as time goes by. So that's gesture. And it has a relationship with mime, believe it or not, with mime, because what mimes do is they make gestures like they're pouring something into a cup, like that. They're pouring from a pitcher into a cup, and their hand moves down, and they're actually mimicking or miming the thing that isn't there, namely a cup and a pitcher of water, right? And it's very much that way in drawing. So there's a mental attitude, and it has to do with the large muscles of your arms. You know, if you're making gestures with your hands, you're kind of throwing your arms like this, and it's the same thing when you're drawing. You're moving your lower arms around a lot. Okay, then we have a thing called, and you know, buildings the same way, like the La Sagrada Familia, for example, will be kind of drawing that. You'd be throwing it's got some spires that kind of look like this, and then there's, you know, there are some kind of spiky things that happen on the spires, and it's all about mimicking the various parts on the cathedral. You know, in more of a gestural movement kind of a drawing, rather than just getting in there and drawing all the detail right off the bat. So that's gesture. We also have contour. So contour has more to do with fine motor control, because you are using the ends of your fingers and you're kind of moving your fingers around in order to create a drawing. And contour might be something like this. I mean, let's say it was flowers. You're actually believing that you're touching the edges of things as you draw. See? Actually believing that your hand is tracing and touching the objects. And quite often you put the two together, the gesture and the contour, and they kind of form a little bit of a partnership. And the gesture helps to organize things, you know? It just helps to organize things, and then you can do contour work on top of it. It actually works rather well. It works well with watercolor as well, also. So that's gesture and contour. So gesture has to do with kind of miming and with large motor movements, and that's a skill. You get better at it. And contour has to do with small motor movements and also with the sense of touch, because the trick to doing really good contour drawings is to form the absolute belief that you are touching the thing physically that you are drawing, except you're doing the touching with the end of a pencil or a pen or so forth. So there's a mental attitude, is what I'm saying. There's a mental posture that you adopt with most of these ways of seeing and drawing. It's a bit like a person learning an athletic skill. You know, they've got these psychological coaches for Olympic people and so forth, and you know, they'll give them mental imagery or mental attitudes for them to adopt when they're going to do a ski jump or whatever it happens to be. And it really works. It works really well for drawing, that you actually position your mind in a certain way, and it improves your ability to draw in that particular manner. So that's gesture and contour, and we'll be doing a lot of work with those. And then we have mass, and mass has to do with the positive three-dimensional aspect of things. So, for instance, one way to think about it is it's a bit like a rib cage, you know, without the rest of the person attached. You know, so you can see the back, you can see the spine, you can see the ribs coming off and joining together in the sternum and so forth, and you actually create a massing drawing in that way. So mass is like a wireframe drawing. So if we were doing a dome, you draw the back of the dome as well as the front of it. So it's kind of like a bird cage type of a drawing, where you draw a little heavier as things come forward on the near side, and then you draw a little lighter as things go away from you. So that's a That's a massing drawing. Okay. So it's trying to see things in 3D, and the mental attitude that you adopt is that that this is a box of steam. So this is not a sheet of paper, this is a box of steam, and you're actually building a wire sculpture inside that box of steam with the lines that you draw. Okay, that's massing. So then we have space. And space is a little hard to represent in a little sketch, but what it is you flip your brain over. This is all about the object's mass. The object is about the weight, the heaviness, the three-dimensional aspect, the volumetric aspect of objects, whereas space is about everything else. It's about the stuff in between the objects, not just two-dimensional space. Like two-dimensional space would be the space between my hands here. Three-dimensional space is the hands are objects, and they might even be overlapping, but there's a space that is implied within and between those objects. So there is the space that is context. So if I have this bottle here, the bottle exists in a contextual space, and it also creates little spaces with its major articulations. It suggests small spaces in here. And there might even be a kind of almost a tactile level of space, which would be in these little grooves in the top of the bottle. So you can think of it in three levels: the context, major articulations, the spaces implied in here, and then the little spaces where it's almost like tucking your finger inside. And space is, you have to adopt the mental attitude that the thing, like a hand or whatever it happens to be, is actually surrounded by a plastic substance, namely the space, plastic meaning pliable substance, and you actually draw the object by drawing the space. I don't know if we can do this with a Copic pen, but maybe, by drawing the spaces, and you don't draw the contour lines. They only happen because you interrupt your strokes. I'm doing a great job of it here, but you interrupt your strokes as they hit the object. See? So in trying to do a quick job of it, actually takes a little while to do it. In trying to do a quick job of it here, I drew a hand without drawing the hand. Okay, I've drawn the spaces around the hand, and that would include the spaces in front of the hand. So you end up with a lot of strokes running in front, and basically the object, the building, the whatever it is, begins to show up. But it's almost like it's underwater, and you actually draw the water in front of it and beside it and within it in order to make the object show up. And you can get some really interesting results, particularly with charcoal. It's more amenable to showing this stuff than a felt pen. So then we have modeling. So modeling is all about chiaroscuro, or painting with light and shadow. So it's the typical kind of thing where you have an apple and there's a shade side to it, and there's a light side to it, like this. And so then you have a darker accent in some areas, you have bounce light, and then you have shadow, right? So it's about what we usually think of. It's what we usually think of when we think of shading things. So we might have a highlight, we might have a dark accent, we might have a bounce light, and we may have a cast shadow, right? So there are little formulaic ways of looking at that, and we will look at that. And of course, with buildings, it's an important thing to develop some skill at as well. So then we have modeling. We have silhouette. So silhouette is a very important one. People have made the statement in centuries past that silhouette is the most fundamental quality of form. So if you think about that, it actually has, right from the beginning, a lot of survival value, because it's a bit like a shadow, you know, because if you imagine something showing up at the mouth of your cave, I'm going a little further back than most of you do, but if you saw somebody showing up at the mouth of your cave and you saw a silhouette up against the light, you'd want to know if that was a bear or a deer, right? You'd want to be pretty sure about that as quick as possible. So silhouette is very important. Even babies, you know, I mean, babies, even if their eyes are not adapted to light and so forth, they would be able to see the silhouette of things. So developing an ability to create silhouettes is of interest. Whether they're positive silhouettes like that, which is relatively easy, or lost his nose there. I haven't done this with a felt pen before. Or a negative silhouette. Like that. That particular skill is actually a lot of use, because if you get the silhouette of something right, it actually doesn't take much to turn it into a reasonable drawing. But if you get the silhouette wrong, it's like you're not going to change that cave bear into a persuasive deer, you know? It's just not going to work for you. And silhouettes has to do with like instant recognition of correctness of form. If you think about highway signs and so on, you know, like you see the George Washington or Abraham Lincoln on a highway down in the States or something, you recognize what that is from a long, long distance, you know. So if you were drawing a face and you were going to get the silhouette, so if you got that outer shape reasonable, and then you went in and actually just drew on top of it, you wouldn't have to do a lot of you wouldn't have to fight very hard to get a reasonable image out of it. But if that silhouette was just was nothing to start with, then you got a little fighting to do to get a decent image. So it's the same thing with the building. So silhouette is, and if you think about skylines of cities and buildings up against the sky, it has to do with that. So silhouette. Figure ground is the next one. And by the way, silhouette. Anybody, silhouette? Anybody got any idea where the name silhouette comes from? I know you don't. I'm just asking because I know. Do you know any idea where it comes from? Just take a guess. Silhouette. Is it French? Good. A good start. Yeah. Well, just what is it again? Sorry. Yeah, in science? Yes. Yeah? Okay, I'm going to tell you, because I kind of wondered. I thought, I'm going to look it up, you know, so I looked it up, Googled it. And it's a guy named Silhouette. Didn't see that coming, did you? There's a guy named Etienne de Silhouette, and he was a finance minister of Louis the 14th or 13th, something like that. Look him up, you know. Just look up Silhouette. Where's the word come from? And he used to cut out little cameos of his friends. You know, now you got a finance minister doing that. You figure there's going to be a little trouble in the old kingdom, right? So at any rate, that's where silhouette comes from. Interesting. And but before that, this is just so interesting when you look these things up. You always just use these words, you don't think about it. And there was apparently the earliest recorded use of silhouette was an ancient Chinese emperor whose lady friend passed away, and he was very sad about it, and so his courtiers made a leather puppet of her and would have performances playing the whatever Chinese harpsichord or whatever they had, I don't know what, and it became a popular court entertainment, and that traveled with the army, and that got to Thailand, and the Thai puppets come from that. Interesting, I think it's interesting, and so and it was such a big entertainment that there was a cafe in Paris called the Black Cat, the Chat Noir. And it was the silhouette of a black cat, right, that they had up there. And they used to do entire performances and nightclub acts with silhouettes in the 1800s. So they'd have reenactments of battles and all kinds of stuff, and it was all done in silhouette. It's cool. So anyhow, it's been around for a while, but it's an important little thing. And you notice that I did a positive and I did a negative silhouette. Okay? So that is the nature of it, is being able to, in your mind's eye, kind of flip these things back and forth to be able to see the positive surroundings that create the silhouette shape inside. So there's a little bit of a technique to it. Okay, and then there is also something called the figure-ground relationship. Or UOUND, figure-ground relationship, and it involves a silhouette, but it kind of involves it in a little different way, because that's where you start thinking about, okay, you're doing the silhouette, could be a building or whatever, or a face, which is just another kind of building, and then it's dark on the one side, and then becomes lighter, and then the background comes in and kind of negotiates with it and makes it lighter on the other side, see, like that. So this is a figure ground reversal. So you can take a shape or even a line, and it can be darker than the background in one place, and then by turning the background, it can become lighter than the background in another location. So this is a figure ground reversal. These are types of figure ground relationships. You can have a thing being darker than the background, lighter than the background, or transitional, which is here, where it starts out darker than the background and ends up lighter than the background. There's only 3 possibilities. There are little things to do inside there, though. You end up with these little areas here, this area where it's sort of neither one or the other. That's termed an area of ambiguity. And you are able to manipulate this idea, darker than, lighter than, and transitional, and do some very interesting things with it, which we will see. So a lot of these things are quite simple in and of themselves, but they have potential, for being quite powerful in ways that you draw, in improving ways that you draw, and also ways that you see. And by the way, a huge building has this as well. For instance, you could have a cathedral that was darker than the background. So I've got some kind of a cathedral shape here. It's darker than the background, like this. So here's our picture. It can be lighter than the background, where the background comes in and does various things. Then we see the spire on the cathedral like that, because it's catching morning light, let's say, or evening light, whatever. So it's darker than or lighter than the background. So you can have the same building that has that kind of situation, and you can also have it be transitional. It can start out where it's darker than the background up here, and as it moves down, it gradually becomes lighter than the background, and the background comes in and shows up its shape. So it could be trees, it could be other buildings in the city, it could be all kinds of things that create that dark background. But the same object, which might be hundreds of feet high, can be darker than the background, lighter than the background, and transitional. It can change from being darker than to being lighter than. Even La Sagrada Familia, I'll bring a picture in that you can have another time that shows that happening with that building. And then once you get the lighting correct, then all you have to do is begin drawing detail and other contour work on top of it, and the shapes that you've managed to create kind of carry the weight of the composition. See, so it's turning into chart anyway. You know, so your lines can kind of dance on top of the silhouette shapes that can have. It can be darker than, darker, lighter, or transitional. And once you get a grip on that you can make it happen while you're drawing, you'll see it can be quite an interesting effect for you to work with. So then we have tonality. So tonality, I'm going to get 3 tones out here. So tonality has to do with looking at a continuous toned image, like for example, a color photo of something or the color image that you have when you look at things, and try to analyze it into dark shapes, light shapes, and medium shapes in tone. Now, so you can actually do a kind of an abstraction of it. I'll just do it as a face here. So we can have, I can use a middle tone to create a face. So far it's got a lot of line drawing in there, but what I want to do is create a set of tonal shapes. So I'm going to color this into a medium kind of tone. Up on the side here, I'll darken that. I'll come in underneath here. The side of the nose can be a medium tone, and underneath it, this side of the upper lip, underneath the lower lip, like that can be a medium tone. I come up this side and I can turn that medium there, throw a little bit of hair in here. I can come around the background and have something coming through there in order to make the light tones show up. See? So I can begin to make a face appear with a set of tonal patterns. So then I can take a darker tone and find places where a darker tone would be appropriate. So I can come in here into the eye area like this, and next to the nose, let's say, in certain places, under the nose, that's usually fairly dark, underneath the upper lip, into the corners like this, and underneath the lower lip, and over here in the beginning of the other eye here, and into this ear, let's say, and then come down and maybe even throw some darker tone running through the background and some hair and all that kind of thing. So my face is gradually beginning to a little dark touch right there. So far the way I've been thinking about this is I've used the gray, the medium, or the light gray in order to create white shapes. Then I've used so that was what that mid-tone gray was. Then I've used a darker gray in order to carve up those mid-tone shapes into more meaningful kind of subcomponents there, see? Like that. And I can even use more of it in order to bring in some of the background there, right, into the picture. So this is 3 tones. And you can become adept at using 3 tones in lots of illustrations, because then all you have to do is add some contour work to it. You know, and you can end up with a reasonable reasonable little drawing, even adding some dark shapes there. So this has, what I've done is I've used lights, medium tones, mids, and darks, plus detail, or plus contour. And you can develop a little system of that which can apply to buildings and to drawing driftwood or drawing people or anything of that sort, right? And so that has to do with tonal steps, with understanding how tone works. And it's more than just, oh, I'm doing some dark stuff and some middle stuff and light stuff. It's more than that. The lights in a picture create sparkle. The midtones in a picture create richness, and the darks in a picture create impact. And the contour work gives you detail. And we crave all of those things.